The boardroom fell deadly silent when he walked in. 20 men in tailored suits, each worth more than most would earn in 10 lifetimes, suddenly looked like schoolboys caught cheating. But Dante Moretti wasn't here for business. He was here for justice. And sitting in the center chair, pale as death itself, was the man who'd once told his daughter she'd never amount to anything. The same man who'd skipped her college graduation because a toy store girl wasn't worth his time. The same man who was about to learn that the woman he'd discarded had just become untouchable. Gentlemen, Dante's voice was silk over steel. Let me introduce you to my wife. Grace Moretti. The woman you're about to make very, very wealthy. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to a tiny toy store on the east side. Back to a girl who'd been invisible her entire life. Back to the moment everything changed. Grace Chandler had always been good at being invisible. 26 years old, working the evening shift at Rainbow Dreams toy store, living in a studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and broken promises. Her parents hadn't called in 3 months. Not since she told them she wasn't going back to graduate school. Not since she'd chosen to work with children instead of chasing the corporate career they'd mapped out for her. You're throwing your life away, her father had said, his voice cold with disappointment. You have a business degree. And you're selling toys. I'm helping children, Grace had replied quietly. That matters to me. Her mother had simply turned away. The message was clear. If Grace wasn't going to be the daughter they wanted, she wouldn't be their daughter at all. That had been in August. Now, in the dead of November, Grace counted the register with trembling hands, wondering if she could make rent this month. Wondering if her parents had been right all along. Wondering if choosing passion over prestige had been the most naive mistake of her life. The bell above the door chimed. Grace looked up, ready to plaster on her professional smile. And then her breath caught in her throat. The man who walked in didn't belong in a toy store. He belonged on magazine covers, in penthouses, in worlds Grace had never touched. 6'3" of lean muscle wrapped in a black suit that probably cost more than her car. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and darker eyes. Mediterranean heritage, she guessed. Italian, maybe. The kind of man who turned heads and stopped conversations. But it wasn't his devastating looks that held Grace frozen. It was the little boy clutching his hand. 4 years old, maybe 5, with the same dark hair and the same striking features. The child was dressed in expensive clothes, but his eyes were uncertain, nervous, the way children get when they're in unfamiliar territory. Good evening, the man said, his voice carrying just the hint of an accent that made Grace's stomach flutter. We're looking for something special. Grace found her voice, her professional training kicking in. Of course. What's the occasion? The man looked down at the boy, and Grace watched his entire demeanor transform. The intimidating presence softened into something heartbreakingly tender. My son's birthday. 5 years old tomorrow. He paused, and Grace saw a flash of something painful cross his face. His mother won't be there. I want to make it special. The little boy looked up at his father with absolute adoration, then peeked shyly at Grace. She immediately crouched down to his level, ignoring the way her knees protested on the hard floor. Hi there, birthday boy. I'm Grace. What's your name? The child hesitated, then whispered, Luca. Luca, Grace repeated warmly. That's a beautiful name. Tell me, Luca, what kind of toys do you like? And just like that, the child's face lit up. I like building things. Like towers and castles and bridges. Grace's smile became genuine. A builder. Very impressive. I have some ideas. Want to see? What Grace didn't know was that Dante Moretti had just made a decision. Standing there, watching this woman with clearance rack shoes and tired eyes treat his son like he was the most important person in the world, Dante Moretti felt something he hadn't felt since his wife left. Hope. Grace spent 40 minutes with them. She showed Luca building sets, explained the different difficulty levels, asked questions about his interests, his abilities, his dreams. She was patient, attentive, genuinely interested. She made suggestions without being pushy, answered Luca's endless questions without condescension, and spoke to him like he was intelligent and capable. Dante watched her work, cataloging details. The way she laughed at Luca's jokes. The way she automatically adjusted her body language to be less intimidating for a small child. The way her whole face transformed when she smiled, turning from plain to luminous. When Luca finally selected a massive castle building set, his eyes shining with excitement, Grace rang up the purchase. $347. She expected a credit card. Instead, Dante pulled out a money clip thick with hundreds and peeled off 4 bills. "Keep the change," he said quietly. Grace blinked. "Sir, that's $53. "I know." His dark eyes held hers, and Grace felt heat creep up her neck. "Thank you for making my son's birthday special. You have a gift with children." "I used to be a nanny," Grace heard herself say. Before. Something flickered in Dante's expression. Interest, maybe. Or recognition of pain in someone else. Used to be. Grace felt the familiar ache in her chest. The family moved overseas. "I've been transitioning." It was a polite lie. The truth was messier. The family hadn't wanted to take her with them. After 2 years of caring for their daughter, they'd simply chosen not to offer. Apparently, she was good enough for changing diapers, but not good enough to relocate for. Dante studied her face, and Grace had the unsettling feeling he saw through her careful words to the hurt beneath. "Their loss," he said quietly. Before Grace could respond, Luca tugged on his father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we come back? I want to show Grace what I build." "We'll see, Luca. Please." The child turned those big dark eyes on his father, and Grace watched the mighty man crumble like a sandcastle. "Perhaps," Dante amended, then looked at Grace. "If that would be acceptable." "Of course," Grace said, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "I work most evenings." As they left, bags in hand, Luca turned back and waved enthusiastically. Grace waved back, smiling. She didn't notice Dante watching this exchange with an expression that was equal parts longing and determination. After they left, Grace stood alone in the quiet store, replaying the interaction. $53 in tips. More than she'd made all week. But it wasn't the money that had her heart racing. It was the way Dante had looked at her. Like she was someone worth seeing. Like she mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother: "Your sister got promoted to VP. Thought you should know what success looks like." Grace deleted the message without responding. She'd learned that lesson long ago: nothing she did would ever be enough. Not for them. But maybe, she thought, remembering Luca's delighted smile and Dante's warm eyes, maybe she was enough for someone. They came back 3 days later. Just the two of them, right before closing. This time, Dante was more relaxed, dressed in dark jeans and a sweater that somehow made him look even more attractive. Luca ran straight to Grace, talking a mile a minute about the castle he'd built. "And it has 3 towers and a drawbridge and Daddy helped, but I did most of it myself and," Luca paused for breath, beaming. "It's the best thing I ever made." "That's wonderful," Grace said, genuinely delighted. "You must be very proud." "I am." Luca nodded seriously. "Daddy says I'm a natural engineer." Grace looked up at Dante, who shrugged slightly. "He is. He gets it from my father. He was a builder." Something in the past tense caught Grace's attention. "Was?" "He passed away 5 years ago." Dante's voice was neutral, but Grace saw the tightness around his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Dante changed the subject smoothly. Luca wanted to thank you for helping him pick the perfect birthday present. So we brought you something. Luca thrust out a small box, wrapped in slightly crumpled paper. I wrapped it myself. Grace felt her throat tighten. You didn't have to, we wanted to, Dante said firmly. Please. Open it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny castle. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. It's beautiful. Daddy picked it but I helped. Luca was practically vibrating with pride. Grace crouched down and pulled Luca into a hug. Thank you so much. I'll treasure it always. When she stood, Dante was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Grace, he said quietly, would you like to have dinner with us? Luca's been asking about you constantly, and I. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. I'd like to get to know you better. Grace knew she should say no. She knew nothing about this man except that he was wealthy, attentive to his son, and made her heart race. She should be cautious, careful, protected. Instead, she heard herself say, I'd love to. Dante's smile was brilliant. Tomorrow. I can pick you up after your shift. Okay. As they left, Luca waved goodbye, and Dante looked back over his shoulder. The expression on his face made Grace's stomach flip. It was hunger and hope and something that looked dangerously close to devotion. What Grace didn't know was that Dante Moretti didn't do anything impulsively. He'd spent the last 3 days running a complete background check on her. He knew about her parents' coldness, her struggling finances, her genuine love for working with children. He knew she was exactly what she appeared to be, a good woman dealt a bad hand by life. And he'd decided she deserved better. Much better. Dinner turned into a regular thing. Then lunches. Then afternoons at the park with Luca. Within a month, Grace was spending more time at Dante's stunning estate than in her cramped apartment. Within 2 months, she'd learned that Dante was in import-export, which seemed to involve a lot of security and carefully worded phone calls. But she also learned that he made pancakes every Sunday, that he read to Luca every night without fail, that he donated anonymously to 3 different children's charities. She learned that his wife had left when Luca was 2, overwhelmed by the demands of Dante's world. She learned that Dante's father had built an empire from nothing, and that Dante was working to transform that empire into something legitimate, something Luca could be proud of. What she didn't learn was exactly what business his father had been in. And she didn't ask. Because every time she was with them, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years, wanted. Valued. Loved. It was Luca who said it first. I love you, Grace. Simple, direct, the way children speak truth without armor. They were building with blocks in the family room, Dante working nearby on his laptop. Grace felt her heart expand and crack simultaneously. I love you too, sweetheart. Good, Luca said matter-of-factly. Because I asked Daddy if you could be my mom, and he said maybe if you wanted to. Grace's head snapped up to look at Dante, who'd gone very still, his dark eyes locked on her face. Luca, he said carefully, we talked about letting Grace decide in her own time. But she loves me, Luca pointed out with unassailable 5-year-old logic. So she probably loves you too, right Grace? Grace's mouth had gone dry. She looked at Dante, seeing vulnerability in his expression, hope and fear warring behind his usual control. Right? She whispered. Dante stood slowly, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. Grace, he said quietly, I know this is fast. I know we should take more time. But I've spent my entire life calculating risks, making strategic decisions, planning every move. And then you walked into my life, and strategy went out the window. He took her hand, his larger one warm and steady around hers. I love you. Luca loves you. Stay with us. Not just for visits. Stay. Grace thought about her lonely apartment. Her parents who hadn't called in 4 months. The job that paid barely enough to survive. The life that felt like waiting for something to begin. Then she looked at Luca, who was watching her with desperate hope. At Dante, who'd made her feel worthy for the first time in her life. At this beautiful home that already felt more like family than her own parents ever had. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. Luca's whoop of joy could probably be heard 3 rooms away. Dante's kiss was gentle and reverent and full of promise. And Grace felt something click into place, like a key finding the lock it was made for. She moved in the next week. Quit her job the week after that. Spent her days with Luca and her nights learning Dante's world. She learned about the legitimate businesses, shipping companies, real estate development, restaurants. She learned about the complicated relationships with other powerful families. She learned that Dante's world wasn't entirely legal, but that he was working systematically to change that for Luca's future. I want my son to have choices I never had, Dante told her one night as they stood on the terrace overlooking the grounds. I want him to be proud of his family name, not burdened by it. He already is proud, Grace said. He thinks you hung the moon. And you? Dante pulled her closer. What do you think? Grace smiled against his chest. I think you're the best man I've ever known. I think you're changing the world one decision at a time. And I think Luca and I are very lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Dante corrected. You saved us, Grace. Both of us. 3 months later, Dante proposed with a ring that probably cost more than Grace had earned in her entire life. She said yes before he'd finished asking. They married in the garden, surrounded by Dante's extended family and the few friends Grace had maintained. Her parents weren't invited. When her mother texted asking why they hadn't received an invitation, Grace replied simply, "You made it clear I wasn't the daughter you wanted. Now I'm someone else's family." Her mother never responded. Grace told herself it didn't hurt. She almost believed it. But the universe has a funny way of bringing things full circle. 18 months after the wedding, Grace stood in Dante's study, reviewing the portfolio of a new acquisition. Moretti Holdings had expanded significantly, buying up struggling companies and turning them profitable through strategic restructuring. It was all legitimate, all legal, and all successful. This one, Dante said, pointing to a file, is interesting. Tech startup with brilliant innovation but terrible management. The founder is desperate. We could acquire for a fraction of its actual value. Grace scanned the documents, then froze. The company name. The founder's name. Dante, she said carefully, this is my father's company. Dante's expression didn't change. I know. Grace's head snapped up. You know. I've been watching it for 6 months. Your father overextended, made bad investments, trusted the wrong partners. He's 3 months from bankruptcy. And you want to buy it. I want to save it. Dante's voice was gentle but firm. The technology is revolutionary. The employees don't deserve to lose their jobs because of poor leadership. And he paused. And I think your father needs to learn some humility. Grace felt something dark and satisfying unfurl in her chest. What did you have in mind? Dante's smile was sharp. How would you like to run a tech company, Mrs. Moretti? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Moretti Holdings would acquire Chandler Technologies. Grace would be installed as CEO. Her father would be offered a position as consultant, reporting to his daughter. The company would be restructured, the bad decisions corrected, and within a year, it would be more profitable than ever. He'll never agree, Grace said. His pride won't allow it. He won't have a choice. It's accept our offer or watch everything he built crumble to dust. Dante's voice was cold, the tone of a man who'd built an empire on strategic ruthlessness. Then his expression softened. But Grace, if this is too much, if you don't want to face them, I want to, Grace interrupted. God help me, I want them to see. I want them to know that the daughter they threw away became something they never imagined. Then let's show them. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Dante's boardroom. 20 representatives from Moretti Holdings facing 3 from Chandler Technologies, Grace's father, her mother who managed company PR, and their attorney. Grace dressed carefully that morning. Designer suit, Dante's anniversary gift, elegant jewelry, hair and makeup flawless. She looked like power. She felt like justice. When she walked into that boardroom on Dante's arm, she watched her father's face go white. Watched her mother's practiced smile falter. Watched them realize, with dawning horror, that the daughter they dismissed was now the woman who held their future in her hands. Mr. and Mrs. Chandler, Dante said smoothly, "Thank you for coming. Let me introduce my wife, Grace Moretti, who'll be presenting our acquisition proposal." Her father found his voice. "Grace? You married?" "2 years ago," Grace said coolly. "You weren't invited." The barb landed. Her mother flinched. Her father's jaw tightened. Grace laid out the proposal with cold precision. The acquisition terms. The restructuring plan. Her role as CEO. Her father's demotion to consultant. Every word was a knife blade, sharp and precise and completely justified. When she finished, silence filled the room. Then her father spoke, his voice shaking with rage. "You expect me to report to you? To my daughter who threw her life away on a toy store?" "The daughter you threw away," Grace corrected quietly. "The daughter who wasn't good enough for you. The daughter you told was wasting her potential." She leaned forward, and her voice was steel. "I'm offering to save your company, Dad. To save your employees, your legacy, everything you built. All you have to do is admit that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of more than you gave me credit for." "This is ridiculous," her mother said sharply. "Grace, you can't possibly be qualified to run a tech company." "I have an MBA from Stanford," Grace said calmly. "I spent 2 years studying under Dante, learning business strategy from one of the sharpest minds in the industry. I've been consulting on Moretti Holdings acquisitions for 18 months with a 100% success rate. And unlike Dad, I haven't run a company into the ground through arrogance and poor judgment." Her father stood abruptly. "I won't do this. I won't be humiliated by my own daughter." "Then don't," Grace said simply. "Walk away. Let your company fail. Let 200 employees lose their jobs. Let your legacy die because your pride is more important than reality." She stood too, meeting her father's eyes. "But know this, I'm offering you a choice you never gave me. I'm giving you a chance to be part of something better. You just have to get out of your own way." For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the polished table. 2 wills, equally strong, equally stubborn. Then Grace saw it, the moment her father realized he'd lost. The moment he understood that the daughter he'd dismissed had become more powerful than he'd ever been. He sat back down heavily. "What are the terms?" Dante took over then, laying out the details with clinical precision. Grace watched her parents' faces as they realized how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. This wasn't just a business acquisition. This was a lesson in consequences. When the papers were signed and her parents left, her father pale and shaken, her mother avoiding Grace's eyes, Dante pulled Grace into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm better than okay," Grace said, surprised to find it was true. "I thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated. But mostly I just feel free. Free. Free from needing their approval. Free from the girl who thought she wasn't enough." Grace looked up at him. "You did this for me." "I did this for us," Dante corrected. "For our family. I won't let anyone hurt you, Grace. Not even your parents. Especially not your parents." Grace kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude, love, fierce joy. Thank you, she whispered. For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me believe I was worth fighting for. Always, Dante said. Now and forever. 6 months later, Chandler Technologies was renamed Chandler Moretti Technologies and had tripled its valuation. Grace had proven to be a brilliant CEO, combining her father's technical knowledge with Dante's strategic mind. She'd also proven to be a natural leader, beloved by employees who'd been terrified under her father's volatile management. Her father remained as consultant, slowly, grudgingly, learning humility. He and Grace weren't close, probably never would be. But he'd started ending their business calls with, "Good work," and once, just once, he'd said, "I was wrong about you." It wasn't an apology. But it was acknowledgement. And for Grace, that was enough. Her mother was harder to reach. Pride and embarrassment kept her at arm's length. But she'd come to Luca's 6th birthday party, bringing an expensive gift and stiff conversation. Baby steps, Grace thought. They were moving forward, even if slowly. But the real victory wasn't in her parents' belated recognition. It was in the life Grace had built. She and Dante had welcomed a daughter, Sophia, who had Grace's eyes and Dante's smile. Luca was thriving, now in 1st grade and already talking about becoming an engineer like his grandfather. The family businesses were all legitimate now, the final transformation complete. And Grace, who'd once counted registers in a toy store with tears in her eyes, now ran a multi-million-dollar company, raised 2 beautiful children, and slept every night in the arms of a man who treated her like she'd hung the moon. On the anniversary of that first meeting, Dante surprised her with a gift, ownership of a toy store chain that he'd quietly acquired and rebranded as Grace's Rainbow Dreams. "So other girls like you have a place to matter," he explained. "And so you never forget where we started." Grace cried. Then she kissed him breathless. Then she called her head of operations and started planning how to turn the stores into community centers for underserved children. Because that was the thing about Grace, she'd never forgotten what it felt like to be invisible, discarded, told she wasn't enough. And she'd made it her mission to make sure no child in her orbit ever felt that way. Years later, Luca would bring his own girlfriend to meet his parents, nervous and hopeful. Grace would welcome her with warm arms, remembering another girl who'd been welcomed into an unexpected family. Sophia would grow up knowing her worth was inherent, not earned, because her mother told her so every single day. And Dante would watch his wife transform lives with the same quiet intensity she'd brought to that toy store counter, and he'd know he'd made the right choice. The best choice. The choice that had saved them all. But that first night, standing in the toy store that now bore her name, Grace thought about the girl she'd been. Lonely, struggling, convinced she'd failed. She thought about the family who'd thrown her away. And she thought about the family who'd chosen her, treasured her, built an empire with her at its center. "What are you thinking?" Dante asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I'm thinking," Grace said quietly, "that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. That sometimes being rejected by the people who should love you makes room for the people who actually will." And Grace turned in his arms, smiling up at the man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "And I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Dante kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "Home," he said simply. "Home," Grace agreed. And in that moment, with her husband's arms around her and her children's laughter echoing from the store's play area, Grace finally understood what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not approval. Not recognition. Not even success, though she'd found that too. Just this, the profound, bone-deep knowledge that she was loved. Completely, unconditionally, irrevocably loved. Not for what she achieved or what she could give. Simply for who she was. Grace Chandler had walked into a toy store broken and alone. Grace Moretti walked out whole and surrounded by family. And in between was a man who'd seen her heart and decided it was treasure worth protecting. That was the real story. Not revenge, though there'd been some of that. Not triumph, though she'd earned that too. But transformation. The kind that happens when someone sees you, really sees you, and says, "You're mine. And I'm yours. And together, we're enough."